This is Up to Date on KCUR 89.3. I'm Steve Kraske. The United States has seen the largest outbreak of measles in quite some time, and it's now made its way to both Missouri and Kansas. While a few dozen cases have been reported in Kansas, the first case of the year was just reported in Missouri. Meanwhile, in Texas, hundreds of cases have developed. Here to bring us the latest and explain why this is happening is Dr. Sarah Boyd. She's an infectious disease physician at St. Luke's Health System. Dr. Boyd, always good to have you here. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're seeing the worst outbreak in the state since 2019 with cases rising. For those who don't know, what is this disease and how does it function?
So measles is a virus, and it's spread by the respiratory tract. So when someone coughs or sneezes, then it gets in the air, and someone who's susceptible, either hasn't had it before or been vaccinated, can breathe those particles in and become infected.
And it's pretty easily spread, as I understand it.
It's very easily spread. So if you put 10 people in a room that are susceptible, 9 out of 10 will get measles if there's been an active case in that room in the last 2 hours. So it spreads very easily.
Very easily. How long is someone contagious once they've gotten this thing?
So classically, people think about the rash with measles. So the first symptoms are often fever, cough, runny nose, conjunctivitis, sort of red, watery eyes. And that usually starts about 4 days or so before the classic rash shows up. And so people are contagious from 4 days before the rash until 4 days after the rash appears.
That's a long time. That's more than a week then, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What should people do if they think they've been exposed to measles?
So the most important thing is to contact your healthcare provider to really look at if you're susceptible. So do you have evidence of immunity? Do you have written documentation of your prior vaccination record? Because the vaccine for measles is very effective, and so that can be helpful. And then they can help you troubleshoot if you need to think about what we call post-exposure prophylaxis, which might mean getting a measles vaccine, or there is an immunoglobulin or pooled antibodies that you can use after exposure if you're not immune.
Meaning, and that's a fancy term you just used, that's just something that could mitigate the impact of the measles if you think you've been exposed?
Yes, it's kind of pooled antibodies to help kind of boost or protect what you would normally have available if you'd been immunized or had it in the past.
So if you haven't been immunized and you think you've been exposed, is it too late then if you do get a immunization shot, is it too late for that shot to be effective?
So if we're able to give that shot within that first 72 hours of exposure, it can actually help mitigate or make the illness less severe.
So it's worth making the effort if you think you've been exposed.
Definitely worth making that call.
If you're not vaccinated, how bad can measles ultimately be for people who wind up catching it?
So it's especially certain vulnerable populations, children under 5, as well as adults over 20. And if you have a compromised immune system, you can have risk for encephalitis, which is swelling or infection of the brain. You can get pneumonia. It's pretty common to get ear infections or diarrhea in children.
Wow.
And then 1 to 3 people out of 1,000 cases of measles will die.
Wow. And young people, as you just said, are especially vulnerable here.
Yes. Children under 5 are very vulnerable. And most children will get their vaccine around age 1 and then get a second dose close to school, so that 4 to 6-year-old time. If you have some international travel, you can give vaccine as early as 6 months for kids, but they would still need to stay on their normal immunization, get kind of an extra shot when they turn 1 and then get their booster at 4 to 6.
What about for people who are vaccinated? How effective is that vaccination?
So 1 dose of the MMR vaccine protects about 93% of people, and if you get 2 doses, that raises that up to 97%. So it's very effective, and it's a lifelong protection. I
was just going to say, for someone like me, I think it's safe to say it's been a few decades since I got vaccinated. Am I still protected?
So if you've had that 1 or 2 doses as an adult, you've got that protection. If you've ever had measles in the past, and people that were born before 1957 are felt to be likely immune from contracting illness as a child. So,
yeah.
But it's still worth checking with your physician.
Is the vaccine at the core of why this hasn't been nearly as big of a problem as it once was back in the day?
So the United States actually declared endemic measles, so just measles spreading, eradicated in the year 2000. So that had been a goal through the 70s and 80s and 90s. But we still see cases that come in, usually related to international travel or to travel to places that there still is circulating measles.
The Kansas News Service writes that for the public to be safe from the measles, about 95% of the community needs to be vaccinated against the disease. This is according to the CDC. About 90% of Kansans are vaccinated for measles. Does that suggest that Kansas is still somewhat in a vulnerable position?
So Missouri and Kansas are right around that 90% for children entering school, and that leaves them vulnerable, especially when there are outbreaks, because we really do need to be at that high 95% or higher protection level for the community to really be able to stop those outbreaks quickly.
Are we seeing people starting to get their shots now that there's been so much news coverage of the measles breaking out here?
I think people are definitely looking into what immune records they have, because a lot of people, that's something maybe your parents had and it's filed away somewhere else. And then just having that extra protection, especially if you're immune compromised. We aren't able to vaccinate during pregnancy because it's a live attenuated vaccine, meaning it doesn't give you measles, but it's still a live virus.
Yeah.
And so it's good to have that idea of protection and know what your risk is.
You know, given the political climate that we're in right now, has there been something of a decline in the number of people getting their measles shots?
I think overall there has been question about vaccine. We call it vaccine hesitancy. People who have questions, or maybe they're vaccinating, but vaccinating on a different schedule than is what's typically recommended by pediatricians and CDC. And certainly when these outbreaks happen, if you aren't fully vaccinated for where you need to be, that's where you're vulnerable.
Yeah. What do you tell people who are vaccine hesitant, to use your phrase? What do you say to them to convince them to think about getting the shot?
So especially for MMR, that vaccine has been around a long time and it's highly effective.
MMR is the measles vaccine.
The measles vaccine.
Yeah.
And certainly that risk for encephalitis, which can lead to deafness, can lead to long-term cognitive issues in children, death, all of that is very high risk. And so, I think we've had a long track record with the vaccine safety and its effectiveness, that you really have to measure that risk, particularly if you're around people that are also vulnerable.
So just to underscore the point, is there anything dangerous about taking this vaccine?
So this vaccine, very safe. Sometimes people will get some injection site reaction, kind of where the shot is. Like most vaccines, may get a little bit of achiness or tiredness, but it's usually very well tolerated. But
you mentioned the very slim possibility of some long-term effects here.
Well, the long-term effects would be from the measles infection itself.
I see. Okay. The deafness you mentioned a few seconds ago. Yeah.
The risk for encephalitis or even death.
Well, this has become a big enough concern that Kansas Governor Laura Kelly issued a plea earlier this week to Kansans to vaccinate amid this outbreak. What's the latest on this side of the state line, on the Kansas side? What are you hearing? Are people starting to heed the governor's advice?
So I do think people are, looking into where they are. Do they need vaccination? Do they have that record? And I think it's important to prepare. And particularly if you travel internationally, that risk is going to be ongoing, even if we get this year's outbreak here under control. So
we've had 37 cases of measles in Kansas since the beginning of the year across 8 southwestern Kansas counties, most of which I'm told have been children. And the majority of those cases were people who have not been vaccinated, Doctor?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the Missouri side of the state line, this state just got its first measles case of the year last week. What does that portend going forward, do you think?
So that case is assumed to be related to some travel. So they traveled and came back with measles. I think over the next 3 weeks, that incubation time is most people that they might have exposed will get symptoms in 7 to 14 days, but can be up to 21 days. So we're just going to have to see if there's any potential other spread from that case.
You're saying it can be up to 21 days from first contact with the virus to actually contracting.
To illness.
Just seeing the effects of it, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to tell where people were when they actually were exposed sometimes for folks like you, right?
Correct. And that's why you'll see health department releases if there's concern that maybe they were in a public crowded space. They may release, there was a measles exposure risk at this place at this time. So
do you expect that this outbreak is going to get worse before it gets better?
I think there's definitely that potential. And given the timeline of, you just have to wait and see if new cases come. So
yeah, how much concern should the general public have at this point?
So I think a heightened awareness, checking and seeing with your healthcare provider if you're immune, getting vaccinated if you need to, and I think that will provide a high level of protection.
Okay. What will you be watching as we move forward, as we continue to see how all this plays out?
So we'll definitely need to be watching how many cases continue to come out of these clusters, and if new areas or states develop cases and the subsequent cases to those initial ones, spreading.
Yeah. Is there something about this that, as a doctor, do you find yourself just sort of shaking your head that here we are having a conversation on public radio in 2025 about the dangers of a measles outbreak? I mean, this is kind of an unusual moment for something that a lot of us thought we had put away forever.
Well, I think that's where it comes to the realization that we have these vaccines that provide protection, but when we don't use that tool, we will have cases and things spread. And certainly most of these childhood illnesses, polio, measles, all of those things, there's vaccines for a reason because the disease was detrimental and deadly.
Yeah. Well, that's Dr. Sarah Boyd. She's an infectious disease physician over at St. Luke's Health System. Dr. Boyd, always good to have you here. Thanks for updating us on this thing, okay?
You're welcome.
You bet.